Hey everybody, welcome to episode 102 of the Askdap show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. On this episode we talk about, does downshifting wear your clutch, reliability of Mark 7s, and refilling your cooling system.
Curtis via Facebook says, I have a 2018 R with ACC and DCC. How or will changing to coilover struts affect the DCC?
Alright, so Curtis, you want to put coilovers on a car that has DCC on it from the factory. For anybody who's not familiar, DCC is dynamic chassis control. It's adjustable dampening on the original shocks on the vehicle actually have adjustable dampening. As far as I know, there are not any coilovers that maintain DCC at this point, and again, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but I believe there are no DCC actual replacements. There are companies who make adjustable dampening coilovers like Bilstein and some other companies. Those are for vehicles that actually do not come with DCC from the factory. They are for cars that you want to upfit that option to. So could you put that in a car with DCC? Probably, but it wouldn't probably control through the same factory settings as what you would see on a DCC car. Generally what most people would do on a DCC car is, and this kind of defeats the purpose of having DCC, but you would put standard coilovers or some sort of coilover, either standard or anywhere up to a higher end one, which is adjustable dampening as well. And then you would have to add, after the fact, the DCC Cancelers, and this is made by KW. I'll put a link to them here. You can check them out. For anybody who has DCC and wants to put on coilovers, you will need to do that to prevent lights from coming on and stuff like that. That's what most people would have to do. And again, at this point, I'm not aware of any that actually maintain the actual damping through the vehicle's ride control. So if you want to add coilovers, eventually you will have to unfortunately defeat the DCC dampening on the vehicle.
Joshua via Facebook says, downshifting while coming to a stop. Does that wear out my clutch?
Okay, so will downshifting wear your clutch? So this was a long discussion in the Mark 7 Facebook group. The basic answer is anytime you're going to be using your clutch more, yes, there's probably potential that it's going to wear your clutch more. If you do it properly, I think you're probably not going to have really any significant wear difference. I personally do downshift and use engine braking while I'm braking. You do want a rev match, which basically you're revving the engine to an appropriate RPM to the gear you're shifting down to. So let's say, I don't know, you're doing 60 in fourth and you're going down to third, and you might want to blip it up to maybe about 3,500 or 3,000 RPM or something in that range before you let out the clutch to make sure you're engaging the clutch at the actual engine RPM to get everything kind of synced up. That has kind of a less of a harsh engagement and kind of buck forward when you're actually engaging the clutch in that lower gear. And then you can just kind of use the engine to decel as you go. That's generally going to be the way most people who drive manuals are going to drive. I think there is some case for the fact that lack of using the clutch and just using the brakes, replacing pads is cheaper than replacing a clutch. So people who prefer to go that route, okay, there's some legitimacy to that. I don't know that there's any one more so than the other. I personally have always used engine braking on all my vehicles, and I've had clutches that last, well over 80, 90,000 miles. So that's probably going to be subjective for every person on how they drive, but I would say I wouldn't worry too much about it. If you're going to kill your clutch, especially on Mark 7s, it's probably going to be way more from aggressive driving if you're tuned and modified and stuff like that than it would be from using it for engine braking. So that's just my 2 cents, and hopefully that shares some insight.
I want to refill coolant in my Beetle R-Line 2014. Do I need to dilute the OEM VW coolant?
All right, so you want to refill your coolant. I don't know if you were planning to drain it then fill it, or if you're just trying to flush it, or you're just trying to top it off. If you're just trying to top it off, you can use some water on there. People are going to say to use distilled water. I would say most people in most places are not going to use distilled water. When you do buy, first, one of the reasons why you wouldn't want to dilute your coolant too much with too much water is if you're in cold temperatures, or really any temperatures. You don't want to dilute it too much because then you're defeating the ability for antifreeze to work properly. In cold places, that's even worse because antifreeze, obviously part of the reason why you have it is not just to cool the engine, but also to not freeze when temperatures get really cool or cold outside. So you want to make sure your mix is proper. 50-50 is going to be with the factory coolant we sell from VW is going to mix 50-50. We sell it in gallon jugs. That's G13. You're going to mix it 50-50 with water. And so 1 gallon makes 2, and then you just want to top that up. I'm also going to be looking at something in the near future to show people how to do a coolant flush in the easiest way possible that actually prevents 2 things. 1, a mess, and 2, from having to bleed air out of the system, because air in your cooling system, if you get it stuck and you don't know how to get it out properly, and sometimes it's even tough if you do know how to get it out, depending on the model, can cause your car to overheat and that type of stuff. So I'm going to be putting together something, a kit possibly to make an easy way to flush your cooling system and get fresh coolant in there without as much mess as possible and prevent anything from having to bleed the cooling system. So look forward to that in the future. It is a little ways out, but it is something that we're going to be looking at coming soon.
Jefferson via Facebook says, "Hey DAP, thanks for all your great content. I'm about to pull the trigger and get a Mark 7 GTI, but I'm a little concerned about the reliability, or at least what blogs ratings people say. I've owned a number of cars, all of which I've put over 180,000 miles on. A number of reports just rail on its reliability. Is that a reflection of it often being driven by younger and more aggressive drivers, or should I really expect to be seeing some major issues at over 100,000 miles? And if so, what are we talking? On my Acura, I would say I'd spend $300 to $500 per year on small repairs after it hit 150,000, but not much before that. If I'm diligent with the maintenance, is it reasonable to expect to have similar longevity?"
Okay, so Jefferson, you're looking at buying a Mark 7 GTI and you want to know about longevity, you keep your cars a long time, and you're thinking the GTI owners generally tend not to. He linked to a site that actually has a lot of detail about it, a lot of different things. And I want to touch on a lot of different things about this, and this is kind of goes a little bit more into maybe statistics type stuff as opposed to specifics about reliability. So let me touch on reliability stuff first about the Mark 7. Mark 7s now have been out for, I guess, 2.5 to 3 years. They, for example, mine's a 2015, has 35,000 miles on it, no issues to speak of at this point, except for I think we had an update on the AC system because there were some cooling concerns. And then some misfires. That's all we've had thus far. There was really nothing done necessarily to fix the misfires. We have replaced coils and plugs just as an upgrade, and we shot that DIY to show people how to do that. But aside from that, there's really no concerns that we've had thus far. With that said, in my opinion, I've said this leading up to now, probably over the past year, we've gotten similar questions to this, is to me, there's not enough GTIs out there, Mark 7s, that have enough mileage to have a good sample size to determine what is going to be high rates of failures. Early 2015s had some turbo problems, but that was only very early cars, and we haven't seen anything that even closely resembled those turbo failures since then. With that being said, I don't think there's a lot of other pattern failures. I think there's been a few sunroof problems that people have had concerns about, which isn't that super uncommon. I haven't personally experienced those because that car doesn't have a sunroof. There's been a few other small concerns, but nothing major that I've seen at this point. And the problem is, I know whenever you're looking at new cars, any reports you see are not going to generally be a pretty broad estimation of what's actually happening, because where are they getting that data from? The only people who have even remotely accurate data would be VW themselves, because they have to look at warranty claims and failures and that type of stuff. And they look at that stuff and monitor to make sure that if they see pattern failures, they're addressing parts issues. If there are parts failure issues and they need to update to a newer part, they're making sure they're doing that. So they're the only people who are going to have accurate data. They're never going to release that data to publicly say this car is a bad car because XYZ. My gut tells me Mark 7s are actually pretty good cars based on history, but again, until we get into higher mileage, it's really hard to say definitively. Now, with that said, I want to touch on the link to the site that you sent me. And this site basically covered basically saying that if you look at a GTI as a snapshot, it's a below average vehicle as far as reliability. They had it kind of broken out by model, but then they had another graph that showed by year. And then they had kind of this sliding scale that showed a black line that going down that actually showed was the median average reliability. And then if you were above the line, you were good, you were negative, and if you were below the black line, you were positive for average reliability of that year. And then it had it broken out by year. So here are my concerns with that. When you look into the details on this site, I think they try to do a good job, but the problem is this. On GTIs, the snapshot they have of GTIs, they have a sample size of 2,083 vehicles. Now, that's across 20 years of GTIs. So if you look at the average number per year, let's just assuming they have the data they have is flat across all years, they have 104 vehicles per year. To me, that sample size is minuscule. It's not even close to big enough to even get an accurate sample size. And let me give you some examples as to why I know it's not an accurate sample size. Because let's take a look. When you look at the chart, you have Mark IV models. Mark IV started in 99.5, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004. That's Mark IV GTIs. They're basically all the same car across then. There's some different engine variations, but I can tell you because I cut my teeth, first of all, as a technician on the Mark IV. So I have by far, as a technician, the most experience with Mark IVs. We'll talk about the other models later. But if you look at the Mark IV model, the early ones, 99, 2000, actually have a much higher than average failure rate. And then if you look at 2000, it's below average failure rate. 2001 goes up, 2002 is up, and then the later models also go down. So if we're saying that cars that are essentially all the same car, and from 2002 to 2004, or even 2005, they actually use the same engine, identical, they're basically all the same car, that they have different failure rates, it just shows you that the sample size is not large enough to make it wash out, because since they're all the same car, they should have the same failure rates. And if you had a large enough sample size, it would all even out within reason through those years. And the fact that it doesn't, and you have these large disparities between those failure rates, just prove the sample size is not large enough to even get accurate data. A few, 2 or 3 cars skewed really bad one way or the other could potentially make this data inaccurate, which is why you see these variances that don't make sense. Same goes for later models. Mark V GTIs were 06, 07, 08, and 09. Those 06 and 07, and then halfway through 08 had the FSI engine. 08.5 and 09 had a TSI engine. So those both had different rates of failures. So if you look at that, the data is not necessarily representative. And that's kind of a little more of a gray area just because there's a lot of variance in those cars. But when you go into Mark VI, which is 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, 2014, all those are Mark VI GTIs, and literally they're the exact same car with the exact same problems. And actually, those cars, in my opinion, TSIs, as a general rule, kind of had a higher failure rate than most of the other cars just because they had, I'll link to our common problem articles. We have one on FSI and TSI engines. Keep in mind, this does not bear anything on the Mark 7. Those are just those vehicles. So Mark 7s, again, my gut tells me Mark 7s are going to be pretty solid and reliable at this point. I don't see any major failure concerns yet. I don't think, in my opinion, there's enough of them out there for me to definitively feel confident saying that, just because until we get a pretty good number of Mark 7s with probably 60K under the belt, we're probably not going to see what the potential failure or lack of failures or high failure rate of problems that are going to happen with those models. And when we look at this data, to me, the sample size just is so anecdotal, it's not even relevant. Which, I'd rather trust my opinion than anecdotal evidence that doesn't have a sample size big enough yet to really wash out any problems. So I would say go for it. I think anytime you're buying a turbo car, there's going to be a potential for a higher failure rate of problems than non-turbo cars. That's pretty much been through history. Turbo cars tend to be more failure prone. Back in the day, they used to be really high failure rate, especially 80s when they had Chrysler, and then they got more reliable, but early 1.8T stuff had some problems, and then they've seemed to have gotten much better over time. VW and Audi have a lot of them to have worked through a lot of the bugs. So again, Mark 7 seems to be good so far, and I would say go for it. But if you're looking at $300 to $500 for repairs a year, I would say that's not too bad. What you'll actually have is kind of an ebb and flow of probably expensive problem and then very few problems, and then expensive problem and then very few problems. That's kind of what I generally see on most cars, just from my experience. So hopefully that helps and answers your question, and good luck with your Mark 7. Thank you so much for watching episode 102 of the Askdap Show, where I answer your Volkswagen and Audi questions. If you have any questions or comments about the questions answered in this show, be sure to leave in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more like it.